Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Gene Curl, and this is going to be the 7th part in a multi-part series about my deconversion. And I recently had somebody ask me why I'm telling my story, why I think is necessary. And I thought about that for a while. And you know what? I think that I need to tell my story for my sake, because I just feel that my story needs to be told. But also, I think that my story can help other people. Maybe somebody's out there that's where I was and they're struggling, and maybe my story will help them to know they're not alone, help them to provide answers. And, maybe my story will be beneficial to someone in some way. And that is why I've decided that I was going to go ahead and tell my story. So, that said, as I said, this is the 7th part in the series. So if you're a little bit confused about what's going on, you can always go back and watch the other parts of my story. But basically, brief synopsis to get you caught up. I was raised in a Christian cult. I left that cult. I joined the Mormon Church, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I served a full-time mission. I had some doubts on my mission, or I had some things that caused me a little bit of doubt on my mission. I came home from a mission. My life kind of was not that great. And then I got engaged. I was engaged for a couple of years to this lady who her parents didn't want her to marry me. And we wound up, because we were engaged for so long and not actually getting married, we wound up having premarital sex. We had to go through the church discipline. The church threatened to excommunicate me, but then they disfellowshipped me. The people in my ward treated me horribly because I was on church discipline instead of loving me the way they should. And then I worked my way back and got temple recommend and everything, and wound up going to a different ward. And so that's where we're at. So that was the 100-mile overview. It's important to note for this story that I was growing up in a Christian cult, that I was homeschooled. And so there was a lot of things that I wasn't taught, because anything that would go against my father's worldview, I wasn't taught. My father was a pastor. So when I first went to college really challenged my thinking. It made me think about things that I never really thought about, and it made me think about things in a way that I never thought about it. Going to college for the first time in my life, I was taught some critical thinking skills. And now some of this video is going to overlap with my last video, but it's not really telling the same story. I mean, it's part of the same story, but it's important to, even though it's overlaps. So anyhow, so I'd never had any kind of formal education. I'd just been homeschooled. My very first semester in college, I had to take an introductory biology class. I tried to get out of it because I didn't want to take a biology class, because I didn't want to learn about evolution. I knew from what I was taught growing up, and also from being in the LDS church, that evolution was wrong. And it taught that humans came from monkeys, and it taught that there was no God. And I was like, I don't need to learn about evolution. So I tried to get out of it. Well, the very first day in class, the professor, who actually was Mormon, he asked everybody by a show of hands how many people believed in evolution or accepted it as fact, and very few of them did. And he wrote down the approximate number of students that believed in evolution and those who didn't. And then as I went on through the semester, I realized that what I was taught about evolution growing up was not even remotely close to what the theory of evolution actually is. I also realized that the fact that people say that evolution is just a theory, that in science, theory is the highest level of evidence. that gravity is a theory, relativity is a theory, and even though they have so much proof for it, there's so much proof for evolution, and just like there's so much proof for gravity, so much proof for all these other concepts, but they don't say that they've proved it, because in order to say that you proved it, you'd have to show it against every possible scenario that could ever come up, and that's not possible. So therefore, a theory, it's a hypothesis when you first think something. And then if you try to disprove it and you can't disprove it based on your experiments, eventually, long enough, after enough people try to disprove a hypothesis, it becomes a theory. And so saying that something is the theory to a scientist doesn't mean the same thing as it colloquially means to other people. So the theory of evolution means that when they say there's a theory, it means that it's highly respected. But anyhow, I also learned in college that the theory of evolution is not man coming from monkey. It is that all organisms had a common ancestor, and that humans and monkeys and apes, that we all have a common ancestor if you go back far enough, that humans didn't come from monkeys and monkeys didn't come from humans, that both humans and monkeys came from a common ancestor a long, long time ago. And that evolution is small changes over generations. And so anyhow, it was making so much sense to me, and I was starting to think, man, this is making sense. I'm believing this. I can't believe it because I know it's a sin. So I started doing research outside of class, from scientific textbooks and things like that, but I also started watching a lot of debates, like mostly Ken Ham and Kent Hovind. And I'd watch these debates, and the preacher or the intelligent design proponent, they would be well-spoken and they'd be charismatic, fun to listen to. And usually the scientist was not charismatic or fun to listen to. But I started researching the claims that each of them made. And it quickly became apparent that the claims made by Ken Ham and Kent Hovind were easily disproven, where the claims made by the scientist, even though they weren't presented in an eloquent manner, they were easily proved or easily verified. And the more research I did, the more I was convinced that evolution was a fact, even though I didn't want to believe it. And finally, I got to the point where I said, okay, I either have to stick my fingers in my ear and start hollering, la, 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 and just be willingly ignorant, or I can accept the fact. And there's a quote commonly attributed to Mark Twain where he says, or it's also been attributed to Abraham Lincoln, so I'm not really sure who said it, but the point is, the quote goes, when an honest man is proven to be wrong, he can either cease to be honest or he can cease to be mistaken. So I decided that I would rather cease to be mistaken than to cease to be honest. And so I went ahead and it's like, okay, well, there's so much evidence, I just have to accept this. But that in and of itself was kind of shaking my worldview. But it was kind of a perfect storm. There was more than just that. There was all kinds of things going on at the time. I was, of course, going through a major breakup. And before the breakup, my fiance was telling me some troubling things about Joseph Smith that I didn't want to believe. And I was going to try to prove her wrong. But when I did this research, instead of proving her wrong, I proved that she was actually telling me the truth. And I don't know what her goal was in telling me these things, because she actually deeply believed in the church. In fact, she's still in the church, where I am not. My second semester or third semester, I forget now, but I had to take a psychology class, and I also had a class on ancient Egypt. And the psychology class, one of the big things that I got out of psychology class is they were teaching critical thinking. And the class on ancient Egypt started off just talking about the pharaohs and the pyramids and everything. But then she talked a lot about other things that related to Egypt. And she talked about the book of Abraham, which for any of those, anyone familiar with the LDS Church knows, the book of Abraham is a book of Holy Scripture that Joseph Smith said that he got by translating some ancient papyrus that he bought from a traveling mummy salesman. And he said that those writings were the writings of Abraham. After Joseph Smith died, the original papyrus were supposed to be lost, and at the time Joseph Smith translated them, nobody knew how to read Egyptian. But then after that, the Rosetta Stone was found. So years and years later, they actually found the original papyrus that Joseph Smith had translated, and the church sent them to Egyptologists to have them translated to verify that what Joseph Smith said was accurate. And even those Egyptologists in the church said that it had absolutely nothing to do with Abraham or anything that Joseph Smith said, and that it was just a common funerary text written to, I believe, a man named Horror. And so that was a devastating blow to the church. And then they started saying, well, Joseph Smith didn't actually translate it. He was given a revelation because he was trying to translate it. But that's not what Joseph Smith claimed. And that really kind of shook my worldview as well. I mean, that wasn't the first time I'd heard about the Book of Abraham. I'd heard about it before from an uncle, but I assumed that he was lying to me because he just didn't want me to be in the church. The other thing that they talked about in this class on Egyptology, or ancient Egypt, it was the fact that the whole Exodus story in the Bible never literally happened. That Jews were never slaves in Egypt. She said that the pyramids and all of those ancient structures were built by Egyptians, not by Jewish slaves. And she said there's absolutely no shred of evidence at all that the Exodus happened. There's no evidence that they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. There's no evidence they were ever in Egypt or any of that. And I thought, okay, she's got some kind of bias. She's just trying to make us all doubt. So I did research out of class for that as well. I thought, I'd always been told growing up that that it happened, and I thought, well, there's going to be hordes of evidence for it. Well, to my great surprise, when I looked it up, she was telling the truth, and there was no evidence for the Exodus story. Even though biblical scholars still believe it happened, they believe it in lieu of evidence. They believe it in absence of evidence. There's no evidence for it, but they still believe it, and they believe that they will eventually find the evidence. But there's not currently any evidence for the event at all. And that really shook my worldview. So I had a whole bunch of things going on. I was finding out things about the church that I didn't like. I found out that a bunch of extremely racist things said by Brigham Young. I found out that even though I had always been told that it was Brigham Young that had plural wives and that Joseph Smith only had one wife, I found out that Joseph Smith had upwards of 30 wives, and some of the women he married had living husbands at the time he married them, and some of his wives were underage girls. That really bothered me. I was finding out all these things about the church, but I found out about the Mountain Meadows Massacre. I was finding out lots of things. I had read the King Follett Discourse, where it talks about man being God. And I already knew the doctrine, but I was just going on doing as much research about the church as I could. So I was finding out these things about the church. I found out the Exodus story didn't happen. I found out that the Book of Abraham could not possibly be what Joseph Smith claimed it was. And I had realized that evolution actually occurred, that there's so much evidence for it that I could not deny it. All these things together, plus new critical thinking, and I started to have a collapse of my worldview. One day in my psychology class, the professor was talking about how when our worldview is challenged, especially if it's a worldview that is part of our identity, that we will fight hard to protect it because it is easier to fight to defend something you know is wrong than it is to accept the fact that you were mistaken, that you were misled, and to accept a new worldview. And at that point, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I thought to myself, I said, holy shit, I don't believe in God. But then the thought scared me. I knew what the implications of not believing in God were. I knew that it would cause me to lose my family, knew it caused me to lose relationships, it caused me to lose friends. I knew that it would be a huge thing. So I immediately backpedaled. I prayed and said, God, help me to have faith. Forgive me for having doubts. I really started to double down on anything that I could that would help me to grow my faith at that point, because the whole thought of losing my faith was a terrifying aspect or terrifying prospect. At this point, too, there were a lot of people in the church that were treating me poorly. And I had some home teachers come over one day, and they saw that I had the book, The Origin of the Species by Charles Darwin, and they were giving me a hard time about that. Well, then I went to family home evening, and while I was at family home evening, somebody asked me if I accepted the evolution as fact, and I said that I did. And so everybody kneeled in a circle around me and wouldn't let me leave, and they started praying that I would be shown the truth. Well, I felt that I had already been shown the truth, and that the truth just wasn't what they thought the truth was. But the fact that they all knelt down around me to pray for me and didn't give me an option in the matter, it really pissed me off. And I was like, once again, I'm like, well, I don't know if I want to go to family home evening if this is the way I'm going to be treated. But everybody started shunning me and treating me poorly, and just because I accepted what I was learning as fact. I was trying really hard to maintain my faith and to grow my faith, but it was getting more and more difficult. And the more that I tried to reason myself into faith, the more I was actually working my way out of it. And if it hadn't been for the fact that I joined the Navy, I probably would have gone inactive and left the church at that point. But I decided that I needed to get away from my problems. I was still trying to run from my problems. I had just gone through a major breakup, and nothing in my life was going right. So I thought, well, I'm going to join the Navy and see the world. And so I joined the Navy to try to run from my problems. And, that didn't quite work out like I planned, but that's going to be a subject for my next video. My next video is going to be about my time in the Navy, how my time in the Navy kept me from leaving the church. I'm going to be talking about, there's going to be some trigger warnings in the next episode, because my next episode is also going to talk about attempted suicide, and to talk about depression and everything like that. So hopefully you stay tuned for my next episode. That's going to be an interesting one. Hopefully you got something out of this. Hopefully all of this that I'm sharing, I really hope that it's helping somebody, that somebody's getting something out of it, and that I'm not just doing it for my sake. But the fact that from the comments, I get that it is helping some people. So I do really appreciate all the comments. I'm trying to keep up and comment back, but it's getting to be a little overwhelming with all the comments. But I really, really appreciate the comments. Keep the comments coming. Just as I say, just please be kind when you comment. Again, thanks for watching. If you haven't done so already, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe. And also, once you subscribe, click the bell icon so that you'll be notified when I post new videos so that you don't miss the rest of the story. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode.